You probably came here with a question you've been carrying for a while. Why does this keep happening? Why does this specific kind of person, this particular combination of charm and coldness, of intensity and sudden absence, of making you feel genuinely seen one moment and completely invisible the next, why does this person keep appearing in your life? Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Why do you keep finding them? Or why do they keep finding you? And you've probably heard the standard answer. Narcissists target empaths. Sensitive people are easier to manipulate. You give too much, they take too much, and the match is predatory almost by design. You are, in this version of the story, the victim of a personality type that specifically selects for people like you. There is truth in that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but there is something that explanation leaves out, something that matters, something that the people who only ever hear the predator and prey version rarely manage to actually break free of, because knowing you were targeted doesn't explain why the pull was so specific, why the attraction was so overwhelming, why, even after you've named the dynamic and understood it and left it, some part of you remains quietly oriented toward it. Carl Jung would look at the empath and the narcissist standing across from each other, and he would not see predator and prey. He would see two people who made opposite choices in response to the same impossible situation. Two people who each buried something essential very early, under pressure, in the interest of surviving the environments that formed them, and who have been pulled toward each other ever since by the precise shape of what the other is carrying. What this video is going to tell you is the part that almost no content on this topic ever says. What you and the narcissist have in common is not a disorder. It is not a weakness. It is not a character deficiency. It is a wound one you both received before you had language for it. One that produced two entirely different personalities, moving in entirely different directions. And that has been pulling those two personalities toward each other with a force that has no interest whatsoever in your happiness or your healing. The unsettling insight is not that you are like the person who hurt you. The unsettling insight is that you and that person were shaped by the same thing. And until you understand what that thing is, the pattern does not change. Let me describe what it actually feels like to be a highly sensitive person moving through the world. Not the version that gets romanticized, the empath, as spiritual gift, as rare capacity for connection, as healer. That version is real, and it deserves to be real. But underneath it, there is another experience that rarely gets named with any precision. You walk into a room and you feel everyone in it. Not as a general impression, not metaphorically. You feel the specific tension between two people who haven't yet spoken about the thing sitting between them. You feel the particular variety of loneliness in the person in the corner who is performing ease with considerable effort. You feel the low, unacknowledged hum of anxiety that is moving through the room like weather, even though the occasion calls for something else entirely. You feel all of this before you've said hello to anyone, often before you've taken your coat off. And your nervous system, which has been doing this since before you understood that not everyone does this, responds accordingly. It orients, assesses. It begins, automatically and without any conscious instruction from you, the work of reading and managing the emotional environment. Because the emotional environment around you is not something you observe from the outside. It is something you live inside. Here's the part that doesn't get said enough. This was not a gift that arrived. It is a capacity that was trained into you, under pressure, over time, by necessity. Because somewhere early in your life, possibly very early, before the memories are clear, you learned something that organized everything that followed. You learned that your own emotional states created problems. Your distress made the people around you more distressed, which made the environment worse for everyone, which meant the most sensible thing, the safest thing, was to suppress the distress. Quickly, convert it into something more useful, into understanding, into accommodation, into the active work of managing other people's experience so that the environment became bearable for them and therefore for you. You became expert at this, genuinely, impressively expert. The attunement you developed is real. The capacity to feel what others feel, to anticipate needs before they're named, to offer care that is precisely calibrated to what the other person actually needs, rather than what's convenient for you to give. None of that is performed. It was earned, over a long time, under conditions that required it. But here is what it cost. The parts of yourself that were inconvenient went somewhere. The anger because your anger frightened people or disrupted connections, or simply had no acceptable home in the family system you grew up inside. The self-assertion because putting yourself first was labeled selfish, and selfish was perhaps the worst thing to be. The basic animal sense that your own needs matter, that you are allowed to occupy space, that you can want something without immediately justifying that want in terms of what it does for someone else. Not away. The psyche does not do away. It went underground into what Jung called the shadow. And what remained on the surface was a person of extraordinary sensitivity and attunement, oriented almost entirely outward, capable of feeling everything in a room except, reliably and consistently, their own interior. The empath who, when someone asks what they themselves are feeling, goes genuinely blank, not performing uncertainty, actually uncertain, because the suppression of the self has been so practiced, so thorough, so sustained over so many years that the self, when you turn inward looking for it, is difficult to locate. That is not a minor thing. That is someone who has spent years, possibly most of their adult life, relating to the world from the outside in, from other people's experience inward, rather than from their own experience outward. And into that specific vacancy, that person-shaped space where a more self-oriented, more boundary-having, more openly needing self would be walks, someone who has no vacancy whatsoever, someone who is entirely, completely, sometimes overwhelmingly present to their own experience and entirely absent to anyone else's. The charge of that meeting is not weakness. It is not poor judgment. It is the unconscious doing the one thing it was designed to do, reaching outward for what it cannot find within. To understand what is actually happening when the empath and the narcissist find each other, you need one concept, just one, but precisely not in the casual way it usually gets deployed in psychological conversation. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is not the villain of your personality. It is not simply your worst impulses and most shameful moments, though it holds those too. The shadow is everything you were forced to suppress by family, by culture, by the specific conditions of the world that formed you. And crucially, that includes strengths as much as failures. It includes the anger that was too dangerous to express, the hunger, the ambition, the wildness, the basic self-orientation that every human being is born carrying and that some people are trained out of very early. The shadow is not the worst of you. It is the rest of you, the whole, minus whatever fraction was permitted. Now here is where it becomes specific to this dynamic. The empath's shadow is full of self. Think about what a highly sensitive person learns to suppress. Their anger because it frightened people or damaged the connections they depended on, or was never modeled as something safe to show. Their self-assertion because prioritizing themselves was called selfish, and selfish was the worst possible verdict in the world they grew up in. Their basic sense of entitlement, not entitlement in the entitled sense, but in the foundational human sense, the felt conviction that their needs matter, that they have the right to ask, that the world owes them something simply because they exist in it. All of that entered the shadow. What remained was pure, untethered attunement, empathy, without a self to anchor it, sensitivity that can register everything in a room except the simple private signal of its own needs. Now, look at the narcissist. The narcissist is not simply someone who never learned to care about others. That is the surface. What produced the narcissistic personality in almost every serious clinical account was a wound of a very specific kind, an early experience of vulnerability that was catastrophically received, need that was met with humiliation, genuine emotional exposure that produced pain severe enough that the developing psyche built the most effective defense it knew how to construct, a fortress of self. The narcissist's shadow is full of need. Inside the most self-assured, most impervious-seeming person in the room is a repository of vulnerability, so thoroughly protected that even they, most of the time, cannot reach it. The longing for genuine connection that was determined, very early, to be too dangerous to show. The empathy, yes, it is there. Underneath the layers that was suppressed, because feeling what others feel made the world too painful to navigate. The genuine need for love that has never been safely expressible and that has therefore been converted, over decades, into a demand for admiration instead. Admiration can be extracted without the terrifying risk of actually being known. Here is the law Jung spent his career mapping. What we have buried in ourselves, we will find irresistible in others. The empath, carrying a buried self in their shadow, is magnetically pulled towards someone who is entirely, overwhelmingly, self. The narcissist's self-possession, their certainty, their absolute comfort with needing and taking and occupying space, this corresponds with devastating precision to what the empath locked away. The empath doesn't merely find this attractive. They find it recognizable in the specific way shadow material is always recognizable, like catching a glimpse through a window of something you were told doesn't belong to you. From the narcissist side, the empath's attunement, their reflexive orientation toward the other person's experience, their capacity to offer care with a fluency the narcissist has never encountered, without it costing something. All of this corresponds to what the narcissist buried so long ago. They carry no conscious memory of the burying, the need to be genuinely received, to have their interior matter to someone without having to perform or extract it, to be felt, not just observed. The narcissist feels, in the presence of the empath, something that functions like relief, as though the fortress wall, for the first time in a very long time, is not entirely necessary. They are not attracted despite what they buried. They are attracted because of it. Each person is, for the other, a living embodiment of their own shadow, a walking portrait of the half of themselves they have spent years refusing to carry. Jung called this psychological complementarity, two people who form, together, a psychological whole that neither can manage alone, drawn together with a force that feels like fate precisely because it is operating far below the level of conscious preference. They found each other the way two halves of something broken find each other, pulled by what the body remembers of wholeness, even when the mind has long since moved on. Most people understand the empath-narcissist dynamic as a story about what happens between two people. What I want to show you is that it is a single psychological loop running in both directions simultaneously, in both people at once, that neither person can fully see from inside it. Here is how it runs. The first beat is the recognition. When the empath meets the narcissist, something fires that is different from ordinary attraction. It carries a quality of certainty, a sense of significance that arrives before there is any rational basis for it. The empath, who has spent their life attending to other people's experience at the expense of their own, encounters someone who is entirely, unambiguously oriented toward their own interior, who knows what they want and moves toward it. Without the constant emotional triangulation the empath performs automatically, who takes up space without checking first whether it's welcome. Something in the empath responds to this with a pull that is more than admiration. It is recognition, not of the person, exactly, of the quality. The shadow recognizes its own material in another person with a precision and a force that conscious preference cannot match and cannot override. The empath is not thinking, "This person carries my shadow." They are feeling, "Something about this person is different from everyone else. Something about this person makes me more awake than I usually am." That aliveness is real. Its source is not the person. Its source is the empath's own buried material, suddenly more present, more visible, more activated than it has been in years. From the narcissist's side, the recognition is equally precise. The empath's attunement, the way they orient toward the narcissist's experience, anticipate needs, offer care with a fluency the narcissist has never encountered, without it requiring something in return, corresponds to what the narcissist buried so thoroughly. They have no conscious memory of burying it. The need to be genuinely received, to have someone feel them rather than simply observe them, to have their interior matter to another person without performance, without demand, without extraction. The narcissist feels, in the empath's presence, something that functions like relief, like the fortress wall might not, for once, be entirely necessary. This is why the beginning feels, to both people, like something real is happening, because something is. It simply isn't quite what either of them believes it to be. The second beat is the stabilization of the loop. A pattern forms in the early stages that feels, to both people, like compatibility. The empath gives attention, care, the constant low-level labor of attending to the narcissist's states and moods and needs. The narcissist receives, and for a while this receiving produces something genuine in them, a softening, a brief and surprising capacity for warmth. The empath experiences this warmth and reads it as confirmation. Underneath the self-possession, there is a person capable of real reciprocity. There is. But the capacity is buried under decades of defense. What the empath is experiencing is not that capacity coming forward. It is the momentary relief of a wound being soothed from the outside, which is not the same as the wound healing, and which requires increasingly larger doses to produce the same effect. On the empath's side, something else is happening that almost never gets named. The narcissists' hunger, their enormous, effectively unappeasable need for attention and care, matches the empath's supply in a way nothing and no one else ever quite has. The empath has spent their life offering attunement to people who received it partially, gratefully but not consuming. The narcissist receives it completely, as if the empath is, finally, and for the first time, using their full capacity. This feels, from inside the empath's experience, like having found the person their particular nature was designed for. It is not. But understanding why it feels that way is essential to understanding why the loop is so difficult to leave. The third beat is the tightening. The empath gives more. Their own needs, already suppressed before this relationship began, already accustomed to being last on any list, become more suppressed. Their anger goes deeper underground, because the narcissist's response to the empath's anger is reliably destabilizing. The relationship contracts, warmth withdraws, the connection that felt so real suddenly feels threatened, and the empath, whose deepest learned pattern is to suppress the self in the interest of maintaining connection, suppresses harder. The narcissist does not become more capable of reciprocity as more is given. The wound underneath the narcissistic structure cannot be healed from the outside. It can be temporarily relieved, but every time it is relieved from the outside, the pressure to develop an internal capacity is released. The empath's giving, offered genuinely, offered from something that functions as love, actually removes the friction that might eventually push the narcissist toward their own buried material. The empath's compassion, without meaning to, maintains the very dynamic that is costing them themselves. The fourth beat is the question almost no one asks. What am I getting from this? Not what are they extracting. What are you receiving from this specific dynamic, from this specific person that keeps you in it even after you've understood what it is? Because there is something. There is always something. The empath who insists they receive nothing, who locates themselves entirely as the depleted giver with nothing coming back, is not telling themselves the full story. Not because they are dishonest, because what they received is genuinely uncomfortable to name. The narcissist gives the empath, without knowing it and without intending it, something the empath has never given themselves: permission. The narcissist, in their total self-orientation, their absolute ease with needing, with taking, with occupying space and refusing to apologize for any of it, models, continuously and vividly, a way of existing that the empath has never allowed themselves. Watching someone unapologetically put themselves first activates the empath's judgment. Of course it does. It violates everything they were trained toward. It lands as selfish, inconsiderate, too much. But underneath the judgment, something else is also happening. It is waking something up. The empath stays, in part, because they are in sustained proximity to their own shadow. And some part of them below conscious thought, below the narrative of the relationship, knows it. The pull is not only toward the person, it is toward the buried piece of themselves the person embodies, the self that was never permitted to be self-oriented, the anger that was never permitted to be anger, the basic entitlement to exist as a full human being that was surrendered so long ago there is no memory of the surrender. The narcissist is not the empath's opposite. The narcissist is the empath's shadow wearing a face, and that not charm, not chemistry, not the brief and genuine warmth of the early stages is what makes the dynamic so difficult to leave. Because leaving, it means leaving the closest thing the empath has ever found to a living version of the part of themselves they've been missing. What does it actually take to break the loop? And I want to be precise here, because the answers most people reach for: find someone healthier, set better limits earlier, recognize the pattern before it takes hold, are real as far as they go. They matter, but they are downstream of the actual work. The loop runs on a deficit. The empath enters every relationship, not just this one, every relationship with a piece of themselves absent. And the unconscious, which does not accept permanent vacancy, keeps locating people who carry that piece and presenting them as the solution. This continues until the empath stops looking for the piece in other people and begins the harder, slower, more private work of locating it in themselves. Here is what that actually looks like. Reclaiming anger. The empath's buried anger is not a wound requiring management. It is a resource that was confiscated early, under conditions that made the confiscation feel necessary, and that has been running at a deficit ever since. Healthy anger is not aggression. It is not cruelty. It is information. It is the specific signal the nervous system sends when something is wrong, when a limit has been crossed, when you are being treated in a way that doesn't match your actual worth, when a relationship is taking more than it is giving. It is the internal alarm that says, not this, not anymore. The empath with suppressed anger has a disabled alarm, which is why they stay past the point they should, why they absorb more than anyone should absorb, why the loop tightens to a degree that becomes genuinely dangerous before they find the ground to stand on and stop. Reclaiming anger doesn't mean becoming an angry person. It means restoring access to the signal. The practice, at the beginning, is this small. When something produces that feeling, resist the immediate reflex to translate it through the other person's perspective. Ask yourself first, before asking how they must be feeling how you are feeling. Stay with the answer for a moment. Don't convert it into something more manageable yet. That moment, that small, private gap between feeling something and immediately processing it outward, is where the self begins to come back. Reclaiming self-assertion. The empath's self-assertion, their right to have needs, to name them, to have those needs carry real weight in a relationship, went underground because at some critical point, it produced consequences they couldn't afford. People withdrew, connections became unstable. The verdict arrived: too much, too demanding, difficult to love, and so they stopped. Or more precisely, they stopped naming. They became skilled at wanting very little, at locating something appreciable in whatever was offered, at the constant adaptation of their own needs to whatever the available space permitted. Reclaiming self-assertion is not about becoming demanding. It is about running the small experiment of discovering whether having needs actually drives love away, or whether it only drives away the people who needed you not to have any. Those are two very different findings. And the difference between them is the difference between a belief installed under pressure and a truth. The practice. In any relationship, ask not only what this person needs from you, ask what you need. Treat the second answer as equally real, not more important than theirs, equally real, recognizing shadow attraction. The final piece, the one that addresses the pattern directly, is learning to recognize, in real time, when an attraction carries the specific charge of shadow recognition rather than genuine compatibility. The shadow charge feels different from ordinary attraction. It has a compulsive quality, an inevitability, the sense of something being activated that bypasses your preferences and your judgment and simply pulls with a force and a specificity that ordinary attraction doesn't produce. It often arrives with the feeling that this person is unlike anyone you've encountered before, that you had no real choice in the matter. That quality, that specific, compulsive, feels like fate quality, is the signal to pause, not the signal that this is the right person, the signal that you may have found your shadow in human form. The question to ask, when that signal fires, not to suppress it, not to run, but to look at it directly, is this: What quality in this person is producing this pull? And is it a quality I've refused to let myself have? If the answer is yes, if what draws you is their self-possession, their ease with need, their comfort with taking up space, that is not compatibility. That is a map of what lives in your shadow. And the work is not to be in a relationship with the person carrying it. The work is to carry it yourself, not to become them, not to become the kind of self-oriented that wounded people become, but to reclaim, slowly and with increasing confidence, the basic human right to be present enough in your own life that you don't disappear inside a relationship with someone entirely absent from everyone else's. Here is what the empath looks like after this work. Not harder, not colder, not defended in the way that hurt people sometimes defend themselves by feeling less, by maintaining the kind of managed distance that keeps them safe and keeps them unavoidably alone. Not that. What they look like is present, to themselves as much as to others. The capacity to feel what the people around them feel doesn't go away. It was never the problem, and trying to reduce it would be trying to reduce something real and genuinely valuable. But it now operates from a place of selfhood rather than from the absence of one. They are moved by what is moving without being consumed by it, available to other people's pain without converting that availability into the erasure of their own. The most specific quality this produces, the one that shows up in their relationships in a way that's difficult to articulate but unmistakable, once you've felt it from the inside, is this: they can say no, not with hostility, not with the rigid, defended quality of someone who has learned that refusal is the only protection they have left, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has a self to protect and who has discovered that protecting it doesn't drive love away. It does something else. It changes what kind of love is possible. When you are present as your self-needs intact, anger available, limits real, you can no longer be the right match for the specific kind of relationship that required yourself to be absent. Not because you've become more careful, because the vacancy that made that relationship work is no longer there. You have filled it yourself. The empath who has done this work begins to notice something about who is drawn to them. The people who found the earlier version of them, compelling the one without a self, the one who would give and absorb and accommodate indefinitely, those people lose interest. Not always dramatically, but the pull is gone. What they were drawn to was not the empath. It was the vacancy the empath provided. And the vacancy is no longer on offer. The people who find the new version interesting, the one with limits, with occasional refusal, with the willingness to say this is not enough, tend to be different, more capable of actual reciprocity, more interested in the real person than in what the person can provide. What happens to the attraction to narcissistic personalities as this work progresses is not linear and not quick. The shadow charge takes time to lose its voltage. The familiar pull doesn't switch off because you understand it intellectually. Understanding is the beginning, not the resolution. But as the empath integrates the buried material, as they become more capable of the self-possession they once could only locate in others, the irresistibility softens. Not because they've closed themselves off, because they're carrying it themselves now, however imperfectly. And what you can carry yourself, you no longer need someone else to carry for you. The deepest shift, the one that's hardest to describe without sounding like a platitude, is this. The empath discovers that genuine intimacy does not require self-erasure. This is not obvious before the work. The implicit belief, installed early, never consciously examined, is that being fully themselves would be too much, that their needs would be burdensome, their anger destructive, their limits a form of withdrawal, that the only way to be loved was to remain manageable, untroublesome, perpetually attuned, and perpetually without demands of their own. What the work reveals is that this was a survival strategy, not a truth. The self they've been suppressing, the one with anger and needs and limits, and the capacity to say this isn't enough, is not unlovable. It is the most lovable version they have, because it is the actual one. And the love that becomes available to an actual person, not to a performance of selflessness, not to a vacancy, not to an endlessly giving absence of self, is a different kind of love than anything the pattern ever produced. It is love that sees them, not what they offer, not what they can absorb, not the emotional labor they perform so fluently. It looks effortless. Them. That is what the work is for. Before we finish, I want to offer something that might be uncomfortable, and I want to offer it carefully, because it is easy to say, in a way that sounds like it's excusing things that should not be excused. A word about the narcissist, not to suggest that what they did was acceptable, not to imply that the pain they caused was minor, or that you owed them more patience, or that their behavior deserves to be understood at the expense of the real harm it caused. None of that. But this, end quote, the narcissist is also carrying a wound. The grandiosity, the inability to feel what others feel, the entire fortress of self that makes them so damaging to the people around them, that is not strength. It is the most elaborate defense mechanism the psyche knows how to build, constructed over a wound so old and so completely buried that the person living inside the defense usually cannot access the wound anymore. The system built to protect their vulnerability now protects it from them as much as from everyone else. They are not whole. They are fractured in the opposite direction from the empath. The empath lost their self. The narcissist lost their softness. Both of them are half of something that should have been permitted to remain whole. The circumstances that required the split were different. The split itself was the same kind of loss. This does not make their behavior acceptable. It makes it comprehensible. And comprehension, even of someone who hurt you, especially of someone who hurt you, is its own specific kind of freedom. Not the freedom from anger, not the obligation to forgive on a schedule, but the freedom from the story in which you were simply prey, simply unlucky, simply the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were not wrong. You were precisely, almost eerily selected. And you were selected not because you were weak, but because you were carrying the exact thing the other person's unconscious needed to find. Which means the dynamic was never random. Which means every piece of it, the recognition, the loop, the tightening, the specific way it collapsed, was carrying information about both of you. But most relevantly, for the purposes of what changes next, about you. Every moment the narcissist's self-possession pulled at you, that was the map. Every moment their certainty activated something that felt like recognition, that was the map. Every moment you stayed past what you knew, gave past what you had, suppressed yourself one more time in the service of keeping something alive that was taking more than it was giving, that was the map, rendered in the most expensive ink available, pointing at the same thing every single time. The buried self, the anger that was too much, the needs that were inconvenient, the basic, inalienable right to exist as a full human being, rather than as a provider of care and attunement and emotional labor on behalf of someone who had no idea how to offer any of it back. That self has been waiting. It is still waiting. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Not the kind to process quickly and carry away as a take. The kind worth sitting with in the quiet after this. Ends the kind that deserves honesty rather than a comfortable answer. Think of the quality in the narcissist that drew you in most powerfully. The self-possession, the certainty, the absolute ease with taking up space and needing without apology. Now ask yourself, when did you decide you weren't allowed to have that? Not why they have it, not whether the form they carry it in is healthy. When did you decide it wasn't for you? What happened that turned your own self, your specific, irreplaceable, inconvenient self, into something that needed to be hidden rather than inhabited? That is where the work begins, not in understanding them better, not in finding someone healthier to give yourself to, in finding yourself. What you and the narcissist have in common is not a disorder, it is a wound. And the wound, in both of you, has the same name, a self that was not fully allowed to exist. The difference is what you each did with that. The narcissist built a fortress around the absence and called it strength. You built a practice of giving the absence away and called it love. Neither of those is living, but only one of you is in a position to stop.